The millionaire thought he had erased his wife when he left her for her best friend. But on his wedding day, as the cameras flashed, she arrived in a golden Ferrari and stepped out holding 5 children who carried his face. Hi, my beautiful family. May your homes never be touched by betrayal, and may your hearts always be full of truth and love. If you're standing with justice tonight, comment, "Truth wins." And if you believe no lie can bury a mother's strength, comment, "I stand with her." Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support is what keeps this family together. You are not just viewers. You are my strength, my bond, and the reason these stories live. They always said he had a gift for entrances. No matter the room, no matter the crowd, the millionaire carried himself with the kind of easy confidence that drew cameras and whispered admiration. At galas, he wore his tuxedo like armor. At business summits, his handshakes promised both power and charm. And in the eyes of the world, he was untouchable, but behind the curtain of applause, another story waited. My story. I remember the night he told me. His words weren't shouted, weren't even cruel. They were casual, like an afterthought tossed between sips of brandy. "This isn't working anymore. I found someone else." Just like that, 13 years of marriage, of vows whispered in front of God and family, collapsed under a single sentence. At first, I didn't believe him. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, his sick attempt at stirring drama after too many late nights. But his eyes, always so calculating in business, had gone flat. The warmth I once fought for was gone. He didn't flinch when I asked who. He didn't offer a name. He only shrugged, as if love could be folded neatly and placed on a shelf with no explanation. The next morning, I woke to silence. His side of the bed was already stripped bare. No cologne lingered on the pillows, no tie carelessly draped over the chair. By noon, society pages were buzzing. The millionaire bachelor is back on the market. I couldn't hide. The whispers were everywhere. At the grocery store, women who once envied me now looked at me like a discarded shoe. At school pickup, I felt eyes on my back. Teachers exchanging sympathetic smiles they didn't dare voice aloud. Even in my church pew, the silence around me grew heavier than the prayers. At night, I replayed his vows in my head. For better, for worse. In sickness and in health, forsaking all others. I clung to those words, wondering when they lost meaning for him, wondering when I became disposable. Still, I tried to hold my head high. I convinced myself he would regret it, that men like him always circled back to the women who knew them, before the spotlight. But weeks passed and the gossip only grew sharper. I learned to measure my days by the rhythm of rumors. He was seen with someone new. He's happier than ever. He's finally free. I didn't yet know the depth of his betrayal. I didn't yet realize that the someone else was closer than I ever imagined. For now, I only lived with the ache of being erased, replaced, and publicly humiliated. Nights stretched long. I would sit in the darkened kitchen, staring at the clock, hearing echoes of laughter that used to belong to us. The refrigerator hummed. My hand tightened around a cold glass of water I never finished. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to shatter every plate just to prove I still existed. But I stayed quiet. I learned that silence could cut deeper than rage. The world saw him as a man who won, who traded one life for another with flawless precision. They didn't see the wreckage he left behind, the woman pacing empty rooms, the vows torn apart like paper. And as I sat alone, listening to the city outside my window, I felt the faintest flicker inside me, a whisper that the story wasn't finished. He thought he had walked away clean, he thought he had written the ending, but he had no idea how loud the truth could become once it found its voice. For weeks, I tortured myself with questions. Who was she? What did she have that I didn't? Some faceless woman, I thought, some stranger with polished nails and a body untouched by time. I could live with that. I could hate a stranger, but the truth came in fragments. A laugh I recognized in the background of a video clip, a familiar perfume drifting through his suit jacket when I retrieved it from the cleaners. Then, the final blow, a photograph. Him smiling with his arm around her waist, and her face, and not a stranger, not even an acquaintance. It was my best friend. The air left my lungs as if someone had struck me across the chest. We had known each other since college. We shared dorm rooms, whispered secrets under flickering lights, stood as bridesmaids in each other's weddings. She was the one I called when my first baby had a fever at 3 a.m. She was the one who held my hand when my father passed away. And all the while she was holding a knife behind her back. I remember the vacations. The three of us sitting on sun-drenched patios sipping wine, laughter spilling into the warm night. I thought it was friendship. I thought it was trust. But looking back, I see the shadows. Her gaze lingering too long when he spoke. Her compliments, too sharp, too frequent, too rehearsed. At the time, I brushed it aside. I told myself I was paranoid the same way he told me I was. Gaslighting from both sides, and I swallowed it whole. She once told me, "You're so lucky. He adores you." I believed her. I wore her envy like a crown, not realizing it was hunger gnawing at her, waiting for the moment I stumbled so she could step into my place. When the truth settled, betrayal became heavier than grief. I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost a sister. I had lost the one person I trusted to shield me when the world turned cruel. The whispers in town grew sharper. They weren't just talking about him anymore. They were talking about us. Best friends turned rivals. The wife never saw it coming. I wanted to disappear, but instead I forced myself to keep walking, to let them see me endure. Nights became unbearable. Every memory of her arrived like a ghost, her in my kitchen barefoot, stirring sugar into her coffee, her voice echoing in my living room as she told me I deserved happiness. All lies, all poisoned. I sat on the edge of my bed one night, the photograph in my hand. Him and her smiling, as if I had never existed. Rage burned through me, but underneath it, a colder realization grew. This was no accident. It was a slow betrayal, years in the making, woven into the fabric of my life, until I couldn't tell where trust ended and envy began. And yet, I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because silence had become my weapon. Let them believe they had won. Let them build their castle on foundations of deceit. I would wait. I would watch. Because betrayals like this never stay buried. And the higher they climbed together, the louder their fall would sound. They moved quickly, almost too quickly, as if speed could erase the sin. Within months, they were paraded in magazines, glowing like royalty, the perfect couple reborn from ashes of failed. Yes, the headlines made me sick. Second chances, millionaire finds true happiness. The photographs were worse. Her hand in his, their smiles polished, their clothes glittering under camera flashes. The story the world was fed was simple. They were destiny. My name was barely whispered. In the media's telling, I wasn't a woman betrayed. I was an obstacle, removed. I watched as they rewrote history with golden ink. According to their narrative, his marriage to me had been cold, loveless, doomed from the start. According to their narrative, she had always been the one who truly understood him. I wanted to scream the truth, but every article, every televised interview drowned me out. When asked about me, he only smirked, saying, "Sometimes you have to let go of the past to embrace your future." She sat beside him, nodding like a queen accepting her throne. The betrayal cut deeper when I saw the way people embraced their story. Strangers applauded them. Friends I once called mine posted congratulations, as if their love were noble rather than stolen. I sat in my living room with the curtains drawn, staring at their faces glowing from the television screen. He looked free. She looked triumphant. But beneath the glitz, I recognized the performance. He had always known how to charm an audience, how to mold himself into whatever the moment demanded. And she had studied me long enough to play her role with perfection. Together, they were a golden lie, shimmering on the surface while rot spread underneath. It was in those weeks that my anger hardened into something sharper. No more tears, no more begging the universe for explanations. I began collecting the clippings, recording their interviews, studying their smiles. Every detail became evidence, not for a court but for me. Proof that what they called fate was nothing more than theft dressed in silk. At night, I replayed their televised gala appearance. The cameras followed them as they descended a marble staircase, her in a sequined gown, him in his white tuxedo jacket. The crowd cheered, blinded by the shine. But I wasn't blinded anymore. I noticed the flicker in her eyes when his hand lingered on her back. I saw the way his smile faltered, the moment no one was looking. Golden lies always crack under scrutiny. Still, their act worked on the world. Invitations rolled in. Photographers chased them down red carpets. She became the woman everyone wanted to be. I became the cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties. And yet, in the silence of my home, I felt the first sparks of determination. They thought they had erased me. They thought I would fade into the shadows, forgotten and pitied. But shadows have a way of creeping back when the light burns too bright. I promised myself then, I wouldn't remain silent forever. Let them bask in applause for now. Let them believe their story was flawless. The time would come when truth would step forward and their golden lies would collapse in front of everyone. For betrayal like theirs never ends in a happily ever after. The more their smiles filled the television, the more my own memories began to twist. It was as if each headline pulled me backward, forcing me to relive not just the betrayal, but the quiet, creeping war that had prepared me for it. Gaslighting doesn't come with alarms. It arrives like fog, soft, invisible, until you're lost inside it. I remember the first time he called me paranoid. It was after a party, years before the public betrayal. I had noticed her laugh, lingering too long at his jokes, her hand brushing his sleeve more than once. In the car ride home, I asked casually if he thought she was flirting. He smirked, eyes fixed on the road, and said, "You always imagine things. You make problems where there aren't any." I remember shrinking into silence, telling myself I was overreacting. But deep inside, something had cracked. It didn't stop there. Every time I sensed something wrong, the late nights, the unexplained calls, the subtle distance in his voice, he spun it back on me. "You're too emotional. You're not stable. You twist everything I say." Slowly, he painted me as the problem, while he stood calm, collected, untouchable. And I believed him. That was the cruelest part. Gaslighting makes you question not just your suspicions, but your very self. I started doubting my own memory, second-guessing every word I spoke. Sometimes I'd write things down in a notebook just to prove later that I wasn't imagining them. But even then, when I confronted him, he would chuckle and shake his head. "You really need help," he'd whisper, eyes heavy with false concern. Help, as if I were the broken one. The worst moment came late one night. I had found a message on his phone. Nothing explicit, just a thread of words between him and her that felt too intimate. When I confronted him, he exploded. Not with fists, but with words sharper than knives. He accused me of snooping, of violating trust, of being unstable. He spun it until I was the villain, and by the end I found myself apologizing for catching him. Even now, I can taste the bitterness of that memory. As I watched their staged interviews on television, those old scars began to throb. I realized then that the betrayal hadn't started with the affair. It had started years before, with every whispered doubt he planted in my mind, with every reality he twisted, until I no longer trusted my own eyes. He made me smaller. She helped him do it. And together they convinced me that silence was my only refuge. But scars don't stay hidden forever. The lies he fed me, the poison she disguised as friendship, they left marks no makeup could conceal. Even now, when I catch myself doubting a memory, I hear his voice in my head, mocking. It takes everything in me to answer back, to say, "No, I know what I saw. I know what I lived." The world saw their golden romance, but I carried the shadows of their cruelty. I carried the truth. And as I traced those scars in the quiet of my room, another truth began to emerge. If they could rewrite my life so easily, I could no longer afford silence. My story wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about survival, and survival meant protecting the only people left who were truly mine. The scars of gaslighting still burned inside me, but they weren't the only reminders of his betrayal. There was a quieter truth, a secret I had guarded more fiercely than any memory of his lies. My children. 5 souls who carried his eyes, his smile, his blood. And yet he had abandoned them as easily as he had abandoned me. The world didn't. No. They saw him on magazine covers, free and glowing beside his new bride, unburdened by responsibility. But behind the heavy curtains of my home, life pulsed with the chaos and laughter of 5 little voices. I had shielded them from his absence, perhaps too well. When they asked why their father didn't come by anymore, I softened the truth. He's busy with work. He'll visit soon. Lies of protection, lies I hated myself for, but lies that spared them the cruelty of reality. Raising them alone was never part of the plan. I remembered nights pacing with a crying infant in one arm while rocking a toddler in the other. I remembered the endless laundry, the meals stretched too thin, the exhaustion that blurred into numbness. And yet, I did it. Not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. Each child bore a piece of him. My eldest son had his stubborn jaw. My second daughter had his laugh, the one that once charmed rooms. The twins, still so small, carried echoes of his eyes. And my youngest, barely walking, clung to me, as if he knew I was the only anchor he had left. He never saw them grow. He never heard their questions. He never watched their first steps or wiped their tears. He had erased us, and the world applauded him for it. But secrets have a way of growing heavier with time. Every day I carried the weight of silence, knowing that one moment, one reveal, could shatter the golden lie he built. My children weren't shadows. They were living, breathing truths. And truths don't stay hidden forever. Sometimes, late at night, I imagined the confrontation. Him standing in his tailored suit, flashing that rehearsed smile. Me, stepping forward with 5 children at my side, each one proof that his story was nothing but fiction. I pictured the silence that would fall, the shock in his eyes, the whispers rippling through the crowd. It wasn't revenge I longed for. It was acknowledgement. For years I had been silenced, erased, made to question my very mind, but no amount of gaslighting could erase them. The children were undeniable. They were the evidence he could never rewrite. I knew a day would come when the truth would no longer wait in the shadows, perhaps at his wedding, perhaps sooner. The thought both terrified and fueled me, because exposing him meant exposing them, my babies, my shield, my only comfort. Still, the idea grew like fire in my chest. He wanted the world to see him reborn, free of the past. But the past had faces, and they called me mother. One evening, as I tucked the youngest into bed, my eldest looked at me with eyes too old for his years. "Mama, why doesn't Daddy want us?" My throat closed, and I could only press my lips to his forehead. In that moment, my resolve crystallized. He had abandoned me. But I would not let him abandon them unseen. The world would know. The weight of my children's questions still echoed in my chest when the envelope arrived. At first, I didn't notice it. Just another thick piece of mail, tucked between bills and advertisements. But when I slid my finger beneath the seal and pulled it open, the air around me shifted. The cardstock was heavy, embossed with gold. Elegant lettering curled across the page like a taunt. "You are cordially invited." My eyes froze on the names. His name and hers, written together as if they had always belonged side by side. My breath caught. It wasn't addressed to me. The envelope must have slipped into my mailbox by mistake, a careless shuffle by the postman. But that mistake was a message, one the universe had delivered with cruel precision. I stared at the lines, my hands trembling. My name wasn't there, not even as a footnote, not even as acknowledgement of what I had once been. He had erased me, so completely that I didn't even exist in the story of his new beginning. The children's laughter drifted faintly from the next room, a reminder of the life he had abandoned. Their existence absent from the page made the ink burn hotter in my chest. The invitation wasn't just an announcement of their union. It was a declaration of my erasure. For a long moment I sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread before me like a wound. Despair should have consumed me, but instead something else took root. a fire quiet but steady licking at the edges of my grief. This was not the end. I folded the invitation carefully, placed it back inside its envelope, and smoothed the flap. Shut! My reflection glared back at me from the stainless steel kettle on the counter. Tired, worn, but not defeated. Not anymore. I thought of every humiliation, every headline, every night alone when he made me doubt my worth. I thought of her, smile smug and rehearsed, as she slid into the life that once belonged to me. And I thought of my children, his children, who had been hidden too long. They had chosen their stage, a castle wedding, dripping in gold and grandeur. They wanted the world to see them. Fine, the world would see the truth too. The decision settled in me like steel. I would not remain in the shadows while they celebrated on stolen ground. I would not let my children grow up believing silence was survival. That night, after the little ones had fallen asleep, I returned to the invitation. I traced the gold letters with my fingertip, committing every curve to memory. Then, with a deep breath, I whispered to the empty room, "You think I'm gone, but I'm coming." The words tasted like power. I slipped the envelope into a drawer, hidden but not forgotten. It wasn't despair that fueled me anymore. It was resolve. The mistake of sending it to me had sparked something they could never put back in its box. And as I turned off the light, I felt the first calm I had known in months. The kind of calm that comes not from surrender, but from clarity. The stage was set, and when I arrived, I wouldn't be alone. The morning of their wedding dawned with cruel brightness. Newspapers splashed their smiling faces across the front page, calling it the event of the season. I read none of it. My attention was fixed on the 5 children gathered around. Me, each dressed in neat, simple clothes that carried no glitter, no lies, only truth. I had made my decision. And now the day had come. The castle loomed in the distance as we approached, its stone walls draped in silk banners, its gates swarming. With luxury cars and photographers, guests arrived in diamonds and tailored suits, their chatter filling the air with anticipation. They expected a fairy tale. They would not be leaving with one. The golden Ferrari purred beneath me as I steered toward the entrance. I hadn't chosen. Say it for vanity. I chose it because spectacle demands spectacle. If they wanted gold, I would arrive in gold. Let them whisper, let them stare. The moment was no longer theirs alone. As the engine silenced, heads turned, conversations faltered. A hush swept the courtyard, broken only by the clicking of cameras as lenses pivoted toward me. They hadn't expected me. They certainly hadn't expected what came next. I opened the door slowly, stepping out in a gown of deep black. It clung to me like armor, absorbing every ray of light the sun tried to throw. Against their silks and sequins, I was the shadow they had tried to bury, resurrected. One by one, the doors of the car opened. My eldest son emerged first, his jaw set in quiet defiance. Then my daughter, her ribboned hair catching the wind. Behind them, the twins clutched each other's hands, their eyes wide but unflinching, and finally the youngest clutching my hand as he toddled forward. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few hands rose to mouths. Whispers sharpened into urgent murmurs. Are those... Could it be... The photographers, sensing scandal, surged closer. Their flashes lit up the courtyard like lightning. I stood tall, gathering my children close. Every step we took forward was deliberate, echoing across the cobblestones like a drumbeat of truth. Inside the castle, laughter carried faintly through open windows. The bride and groom toasted to their destiny, oblivious to the silence spreading outside. They had crafted their fairy tale with golden lies. Now, those lies were about to shatter. A guest, too shocked to stay silent, whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "It's her, the wife, and the children. Look at them, they're his." The ripple turned into a wave. People craned their necks, eyes darting between me and the children, the resemblance undeniable. The story that had been hidden for years was unfolding in real time, and no headline could spin it away now. I kept my gaze fixed on the castle doors. My heart pounded, but my stride never faltered. I thought of the nights alone, of the questions my children asked, of the invitation that mocked my absence. This was the answer. Not words, not accusations, but presence. Visible, undeniable presence. By the time we reached the entrance, the murmurs had swelled into chaos. Guests whispered, argued, speculated. The fairy tale shimmered and cracked at its edges, and as I reached for the grand doors, steadying my youngest on my hip, I felt a silence fall, the charged silence before the truth finally steps into the room. Inside, he was waiting. The castle. Doors groaned open, the noise silencing the chatter inside the grand hall. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, music stilled mid-note, and every eye turned toward the entrance. I stepped in, dressed in black, my children gathered close around me. At the far end of the room, he stood in his tuxedo, glass raised high, a toast still half-formed on his lips. Laughter clung to his voice until it froze in his throat. His gaze landed on me, then drifted downward, scanning the children lined at my side. The glass trembled in his hand. The resemblance was undeniable. My eldest son's jawline mirrored his. My daughter's eyes reflected the same stormy darkness. Even the twins, clutching each other nervously, carried his exact dimpled smile. And the youngest, shifting against my hip, had his father's nose, unmistakable even at 2 years old. The hall thickened with whispers. Guests leaned in, gasping, piecing together the truth faster than he could process it. They look just so like him. 5 of them, 5! How could she hide this? The bride, my former friend, stood beside him in her shimmering gown. She forced a smile, but it cracked at the corners as her eyes darted between his face and mine. Her knuckles whitened around her bouquet. She had always been good at playing roles, the confidant, the savior, the replacement. But in this moment, she looked like what she truly was, an intruder in a story she thought she had rewritten. His hand lowered slowly, the champagne glass clinking against the marble floor. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Our eyes locked across the hall, and for the first time in years he had no words, no smirk, no gaslighting cleverness to twist the scene in his favor. He was naked in the truth, and the truth stood in front of him, wearing his face 5 times over. I took a step forward. The children followed, their small shoes tapping against the polished floor. Each sound echoed like judgment. The bride's voice wavered. "Darling, what is this?" He swallowed, his throat bobbing hard. I don't know." But the lie barely left his lips before his eyes betrayed him, flicking from child to child. Recognition painted across every feature. I could see it, the panic blooming, the calculations racing behind his eyes. He had spent years erasing me, silencing me, building golden lies around her. Yet here I was, tearing it all down without saying a word. The guests' whispers grew bolder. Some stood, craning for a better view. A journalist near the back scribbled furiously, his pen flying across paper. Phones rose, recording every second. The bride shook her head, her voice sharp now. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me she's lying." But she knew. The resemblance was carved too clearly for denial. Her carefully crafted dream was collapsing in real time. I stopped halfway down the aisle, lifting my chin. My children clung. Close, but I felt their strength pressing into me. Together we stood as one undeniable fact. He could erase me, but he could never erase them. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. His shoulders sagged under the weight of 5 pairs of eyes staring back at him. He had abandoned them, and now the world knew. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I simply let silence speak. Because silence in that moment was the loudest weapon of all. The bride's bouquet slipped from her fingers, scattering petals across the floor. The sound of them falling was delicate, but it marked the breaking point. Gasps rippled again, sharper this time. The truth had arrived, and it wasn't leaving quietly. The hall was still buzzing from the fallen bouquet, its petals scattered like fragile truths across the marble floor. His face was pale, his tuxedo suddenly looking more like a costume than armor. Cameras flashed in frantic bursts, hungry for scandal. As the crowd pressed forward in breathless anticipation, I tightened my grip on my youngest and stepped forward, the other 4 closing ranks beside me. Their presence was my strength. His shame was already carved into his silence. But silence wasn't enough anymore. It was time for words. When I spoke, my voice was steady, not raised, not trembling. Steady, the kind of steady forged in years of surviving alone. You left me, I began, eyes fixed on him, but you didn't just leave me. You left them. A gasp moved through the crowd. His mouth opened, desperate to interject, but I didn't give him the chance. You told the world I was nothing. You told her, my eyes flicked to the bride, that you were free, that your past was behind you. But your past is standing here, flesh and blood, staring you in the face. The eldest stepped forward then, his shoulders squared in a way that made him look far older than his years. "Why, Dad?" His voice cracked, but it carried through the hall like thunder. "Why didn't you want us?" The weight of the boy's words crushed the room into silence. Even the bride flinched, her trembling hands clutching at her gown, as though fabric could hold her steady. I looked back at my son, brushing his shoulder gently. "He can't answer, sweetheart, because answers require honesty." My gaze cut back to the groom, his jaw flexed, his hands clenched, but still no. Words came. The guests whispered in a rising tide. How could he hide them? 5 children, abandoned? Everything we thought a lie. The journalists were nearly salivating, pens scratching, phones raised high. The golden fairy tale was unraveling, thread by thread, under the blaze of truth. I took another step closer. You made me question my sanity. You told me I was paranoid, unstable, imagining things. You gaslighted me until I doubted my own reflection. But these children are not paranoia. They are not instability. They are reality. Yours and mine. The bride finally spoke, her voice breaking. You told me she couldn't give you children. The words sliced through the air and a murmur of disbelief surged across the hall. I shook my head slowly, my lips curling into something between grief and pity. Another lie, I said softly, but loud enough for all to hear. He didn't just betray me. He betrayed you too. Her face crumpled and she stumbled back a step, as though the weight of the revelation might split her gown apart. I turned then, not to her, not even to him, but to the crowd, to the world, that had cheered their golden lies. You've celebrated him as a man of charm, a man of success, but here is the truth. He abandoned 5 children to chase a story he could sell, and now that story is over. The cameras exploded in a frenzy. I could feel the storm building, the scandal that would devour everything he thought untouchable. And yet, standing there in the center of it all, I felt strangely calm. My children had been hidden too long. Tonight, they were undeniable. I leaned closer, my eyes locking on his one last time. "Don't look at me," I said coldly. "Look at them. They are the vows you broke." He finally dropped his gaze, shoulders slumping under the unbearable truth of 5 pairs of eyes. The bride's bouquet lay forgotten on the floor. The crowd, restless with whispers, sensed blood in the water. And outside these castle walls, the world was waiting to feast. The silence after my words was brief, a heartbeat stretched thin, before the hall erupted into chaos. Guests rose, from their seats, voices crashing together in disbelief. 5 children, how could he? All this time. She knew, she must have known. The whispers sharpened into accusations, daggers flying in every direction. The bride staggered backward, her sequined gown shimmering under the relentless camera flashes. The victory she had once paraded so proudly now lay poisoned at her feet. Her dream wedding had become a crime scene, not of blood but of betrayal. Business partners clustered near the back, murmuring urgently. Their eyes darted between him and the cameras, calculating risk. One by one, I saw them slipping out the doors, their polished shoes clicking against the marble, as if distance could save them from the fallout. His family sat rigid, some with faces buried in their hands, others shaking their heads in shame. A sister rose abruptly, tears streaking her cheeks as she stormed toward the exit. Even his own blood could not stomach the weight of his lies. The journalists were relentless. Phones glowed like torches, pens scratched furiously, microphones thrust forward. Is it true you abandoned them? Why hide your children? What happens to your empire now? The questions came like gunfire, but he had no shield left. He stood frozen, tuxedo unraveling under the weight of disgrace. The man who once commanded rooms with charm and confidence now looked small, cornered, stripped of every illusion he had built. His golden empire of the carefully crafted brand of success and power was trembling before my eyes, and beside him she trembled too. My former friend, the woman who had thought she won. Her hands shook as she clutched her veil, her painted smile cracking into horror. She had imagined herself triumphant, a queen stepping into her rightful crown. But now she was only collateral damage, exposed as the accomplice of a thief who stole not just a marriage, but 5 children's futures. "You lied to me," she whispered, but the microphone caught it, and the hall gasped. Her bouquet lay abandoned on the floor, petals scattered like pieces of a broken fairy tale. He reached for her arm, desperate, but she pulled away. Her eyes were wide, filled not with love, but with terror. Terror of what her life had become. In a single moment, she realized too late that her throne was built on rot. The guests' whispers grew into a roar. Some shouted, others jeered. The wedding planner tried to restore order, clapping for attention, but it was useless. The Noend had slipped beyond control. I stood still, my children gathered around me, letting the chaos swirl. I didn't need to speak anymore. The truth was alive in the room, tearing apart their golden facade. Cameras caught everything: the broken bride, the disgraced millionaire, the children, undeniable in their resemblance. There would be no burying this scandal. By morning, headlines would scream it across every platform, every news channel. His empire, built on reputation and illusion, would crack under the weight of exposure. He turned toward me then, his face pale, his lips forming words he could not release. Apologies, perhaps. Excuses. But none of it mattered now. His silence was louder than anything he could say. And as for her, the best friend who crossed the line, she finally understood the price of betrayal. Victory had turned to venom. The crown she stole now burned in her hands. I gathered my children close, ready to leave the ruins of their golden castle behind. My part was finished here. The truth had been spoken, the lie shattered, but justice was not always about what fell. Sometimes it was about what survived. And we had survived. The castle still roared behind us as we stepped back into the cool night. The chaos inside spilled through the open doors, shouts, flashes, the crumble of what was once called love. But I didn't need to watch anymore. I had given them the truth. The rest was theirs to choke on. The golden Ferrari waited, gleaming beneath the moonlight, its polished surface reflecting the fractured fairy tale we left behind. I opened the back door first, guiding each child in one by one. Their faces were quiet, solemn, but steady. They had carried the weight of his silence for years. Tonight, that silence shifted. Tonight, it belonged to us. My eldest slid in without a word, his jaw tight, his eyes turned away from the castle. My daughter clutched her ribboned hair as though to anchor herself. The twins curled into each other, small hands clasped. And the youngest, still too little to understand, reached for me, his tiny fingers brushing my arm as if to ask, "Are we safe now?" "Yes," I whispered as I buckled him in. "We're safe." I closed the door, circled to the driver's side, and lowered myself into the seat. The leather was cool beneath me, the steering wheel steady in my grip. For a long moment, I simply sat there, staring at the castle in the rearview mirror. Voices still echoed, light still burned, but the image blurred as my eyes shifted forward. Without another glance, I turned the key. The engine roared to life, its purr louder than the applause that once followed him. The children quieted, lulled by the vibration beneath them, and I pressed my foot to the accelerator. We rolled down the long drive, past marble statues and manicured hedges, past photographers still swarming for one last shot. Flashes lit the night sky, but I didn't slow, didn't smile, didn't wave. Let them capture me as they pleased. My silence was the only headline I needed. The gates swung open, and the road stretched ahead like a promise. I pressed harder, feeling the Ferrari surge forward, carrying us away from the wreckage of lies. The castle shrank behind us until it was nothing more than a shadow swallowed by the dark. Inside the car, no one spoke. The children sat in a cocoon of stillness, their small faces turned toward windows streaked with the reflection of streetlights. And I, for the first time in years, felt a quiet that wasn't heavy with grief. It was peace, fragile, unfamiliar, but real. Justice hadn't come in a courtroom. There had been no judge, no jury. It came in the simplest form, in refusing to stay erased, in letting presence speak where words once failed. He could keep his fortune, his empire of glass. None of it could silence the truth anymore. I thought of the vows he broke, the gaslighting, the years of doubt and loneliness. I thought of her, trembling in her gown, realizing too late that stolen crowns cut deepest. I thought of the faces in the crowd, their whispers turning sharp, their applause turning to ash. All of it belonged to the past now, a chapter closing. Behind me, ahead, the night opened wide. My children breathed softly in the back seat, 5 steady rhythms against the hum of the road. They were not his secret anymore. They were my truth, my legacy, the proof that I had endured. At a red light, I glanced once more in the mirror. Not at the castle, it was gone now, but at myself. My face, reflected in the glass, no longer looked erased. It looked alive. The light turned green. I pressed forward. I didn't look back. I never would again.